Here's my NP249 transfer case that I already rebuilt. My next move is going to be to move it onto the transmission jack and strap it down in a similar way to the way we just took the other one off. And hopefully we will do that without dropping it or dropping it off the transmission jack. Hi Bindi. Ready to do this? Okay, so here we are with the replacement transfer case on the transmission jack. And you'll notice that I am tilting it back right now because we're going to need a similar angle to put it back on as the one we took it off with. What you really want to do is make sure that the side that's up is as high up as you can possibly get it. If you really can't get it up high enough because the angle has changed, you may also want to try to add a block of wood or some other spacer. Okay, so I've added a block of wood to get a little bit more height on the transfer case. Hopefully it's not too much. Really find that angle that it came off of the transmission at so that we can get it back on there. Alright, so here we are once again, attempting to line up our transfer case and our transmission. We'll go ahead and get as close as we can to in position, and then we're going to bring the vehicle back down. Looking pretty good. Alright, we're going to come up on the transmission jack, keeping an eye on the front and keeping a hand on the back. Watching our catalytic converter because we need to get past it. Let's go ahead and move it forward if you start to hit. And we need to be sure to clear the bell housing on the back of the overdrive there. And also keep an eye on the transmission jack itself. Make sure it's not making contact anywhere that it shouldn't be. Okay, so we need to tilt it back and then keep moving up on the trans jack until we start to feel that gear engage. And then we're going to start tilting forward again. And hopefully our block of wood is not so big that we are at the wrong angle now. I think we're almost there. And just keep an eye on all sides of it. And all of the splines. I'm sorry, all of the bolts that stick out. What you want to do is wiggle the entire transfer case, moving it toward the front of the vehicle. And you can adjust the trans jack up and down a little bit to see what creates clearance for you. I'm just pushing on the retainer here. Sometimes you need to come to the back of the vehicle, or the back of the transmission, or so the back of the transfer case retainer, and lift up while you push forward. Alright, once you have enough thread through, like we do in this instance, you see the thread sticking through, then you can put some of the bolts back on. Some of the nuts, I'm sorry. I usually start with these ones here and just work my way around. I'm going to make sure to get all these nuts started. Okay, and of course the sixth one has this piece of metal that I talked about when we put it on, or when we took it off. Gets oriented in such a way as this, and it goes all the way on top of the transfer case. Bring the nut with me. Usually to get it in there I need to lift or reach over from the passenger side with my left hand. And it may be difficult with the place the transmission jack is to get yourself in there. Let's see what we can do. Okay, so sometimes it's good to just move the metal plate. Like I said, it's intended to hold the two brake lines up there. Feel it until you get it into place. It has one side that fits up against the housing of the transfer case, and then the other side is straight, and then grab the nut. And hopefully without knocking the other piece of metal out of your way, you can reach up there and get this last nut started. It can be a little difficult. You're right up against the body of the vehicle, and there's several very sharp screws sticking through from the interior right there to stab you in the finger. Just try not to get stabbed. And once you got that screw finger tight, or that nut finger tight, hopefully all this isn't going anywhere. Okay, and the dealer's service manual tells us that we need to torque these nuts to between 24 and 30 foot-pounds. So I got my torque wrench here, and in my case I'm going to put it at 27 foot-pounds and a half. Go through all of these nuts until you have a click on all of them. I tend to not overdo the top nut because it's a little bit difficult to get it started once it's been tightened all the way. So I tend to tighten it a little bit less than the rest of them. Plus it's difficult to get the torque wrench up there. So I'm going to start by pulling all these in. Now as you tighten these, it should pull the transfer case the rest of the way in. And if for any reason it doesn't come in all the way, maybe because that main gear is not lined up properly. So if for some reason you have that issue, you may need to take the transfer case back down a little bit and move the input so it starts to line up correctly. Most of the time though, if you can get it started at all, it's already in the right place. This may be part of why they made that input shaft a little bit shorter on the later models. I think it's after 96. Again, this one on the passenger side might be a little more difficult to do with a full-size wrench. So I've got an extension and a stubby ratchet to help me turn it. Let's double check we didn't catch the hose for the breather. That looks good. Got this finger tight. Go ahead and reach on up. I'm going to tighten the very top nut best I can, just by hand. Meaning without the torque wrench. Once we've moved all these, it may actually have quite a bit to go. Finger tightening it. There we go. Alright, so the top nut is in place. Just going to get a wrench on it. And again, try not to stab your hand against any of the sharp screws sticking out from the body. There's quite a few of them. And they're all right in this area. Okay, that's about as tight as I can get it with the stubby. Now I'm going to take the torque wrench to everything. For some reason the angle won't let you get the torque wrench on it. Keep moving around until you find an angle where you can get it on there. You want to move so that you're avoiding hitting anything. It might be easier said than done. Let's get a click, you're there. Move on to your next bolt. And this piece of linkage may be in your way a little bit. Hopefully not too much. Every once in a while it's a good idea to check the back of your torque wrench and make sure it's still snug. Don't want to overdo it on any of this stuff. It's pretty good design the way it is, as long as it's tightened. Don't need to get crazy. Alright, so that's 4 out of 5. Just going to use my extension again. I can get the last one over here. And it won't reach with one extension on the torque wrench. I'm actually going to have to get a smaller one. Alright, to reach this last nut that I'm tightening, I'm actually going to put a small extension and a large extension together so that I can move the wrench to the other side of the cross member and still get it on there. Okay, so one of my extensions is a wobbly extension. Without that, you're probably going to have either the transfer case or the exhaust in your way. So using a wobbly extension and another small extension, of course my torque wrench is going to get slightly less accurate this way. Try and stay at 90 degrees. Alright, so that's all of the nuts that retain the transfer case onto the vehicle. I should be able to drop the transmission jack at this point. Hopefully you have enough slack, or can create enough slack to get your strap off. Okay, so we're done with the transmission jack. Transfer case should now be hanging. Just pull this transmission jack out of our way. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to install the Speedo gear. This piece of material shouldn't exist on your Jeep. It's a modification on this one. So you should be able to see a hole in this part of the transfer case right here. You definitely need to be sure that you're in neutral to do this part. We want to go ahead and get our Speedo gear and our Speedo sending unit. And we're going to put them up in here in such a way that the gear ends up in contact with the rear part of the trans. There's a gear in there that it needs to fit into once it's all the way seated. Now, this little retainer has a 1/2 inch bolt, and it basically only orients in one way so that it can hold it down. Now, you can feel the hole above the Speedo. I'm going to take the whole thing, place it up there till you get the bolt started in the hole. And I got a couple turns on it. See if I can give you guys a better view. Okay, so this is the Speedo gear right here. Difficult to film because I have some brake lines in the way. We want to turn this until the fork lines up with these little indentations. There's 4 of these indentations. I want it oriented in such a way that the fork is holding on to 2 of the indentations, one here, one on the other side. And then the bolt on the back gets screwed in to hold the entire Speedo gear and the Speedo sender, which is this top part, in place. So I've got it finger tight. Okay, from this angle you can see a little bit better. I have my 1/2 inch bolt up there that holds the back of the Speedo fork. And I'm just going to get up there and tighten it. Now we can double check once this is installed that there's no binding. Alright, got that reinstalled. I'm just going to turn the front drive shaft yoke and take a look at the back here. Make sure it's turning really good. So as long as this is turning, when I move the front drive shaft yoke, hopefully that Speedo gear is all the way seated in there. Alright, our next move is going to be to go ahead and find our wiring. And you'll see that we want to move the wiring back over the top of the transfer case. And Speedo gets plugged in. Get a little click out of it as long as nothing's broken. And there's the connector reconnected. And then we'll come back around to the other side of the transfer case. And you can see that you can see up here that we have another connector for the 4-wheel drive position switch. Let's go ahead and pop that back in. Now over here on the top of the transfer case, there's a little metal clip that can hold on to this, or you can reconnect it a number of other ways. You can add it to these brake lines, or you can do both. You can add one to the brake lines and then get the other one on this metal clip back here. Whatever your preference is, you just want to make sure that the wiring harness can't go anywhere. Next, we're going to find the breather tube. I've got mine cut up in the linkage right here. And we're going to reconnect the breather tube onto this spot for the breather tube right here. And now we're going to reconnect our linkage. So this piece of linkage right here should push into this. I'm going to go grab some channel locks to make that happen. Okay, so using a pair of channel locks, making sure we're not in our own way, just want to go ahead and push that piece of linkage back together. Okay, so that's most of our connections for the transfer case. Next, we're going to reinstall our front drive shaft onto this yoke here. Okay, so while I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and paint my front yoke with a little bit of black star. Just make sure it won't rust any sooner than it needs to. And I'm going to do the same thing with the rear differential yoke and the front differential yoke. Go ahead and fight rust while I can, because rust never sleeps. Okay, so we are ready to reinstall our front drive shaft. Here's our front yoke here. We're going to go ahead and pick up the front drive shaft. We're going to place it over the cross member. We're going to line things up until we see our U-joint is in the right location. Then we're going to come over here to the front, by the front differential yoke, and we're going to turn things just until we're in the right orientation. We're going to pull our tape out of our way. We're going to push ever so slightly on the U-joint. I'm sorry, the drive shaft, until we get it in the right place. And now we're going to telescope it until it's open. Once you push it open, it should be able to hold into place on both sides. Now, once it's in place on both sides, come back here to the yoke, and we're going to start the 4 bolts that go into the yoke. So these bolts come through the yoke on the differential like this. I'm sorry, on the transfer case like this. I can get that one started. We're going to go ahead and get this friend started on the other side. Now, if you need to rotate the whole thing, I recommend grabbing it here and grabbing it at the front differential yoke and moving the 2 of them together while keeping pressure on the part that telescopes so that you can gain access to the other bolts. Once we've got all 4 of these finger tight, let's go back to the front differential yoke. And we're going to go ahead and put our strap bolts in place. And hopefully we can do all this without dropping either of the U-joint bearing caps. And if you need to, you can rotate the entire thing, as long as we're still up in the air. Give yourself a better view. Get these bolts started in the correct location. And my dealer service manual says to tighten all of these to 12 to 16 foot-pounds. We're going to tighten them to 14 foot-pounds in this case. So once we have the front bolts tight, we come back here and do the same thing with all of these. Again, these should be 12 to 16 foot-pounds tight. Remember, these bolts are going to need a 12-point socket or a 12-point wrench. And that's our front drive shaft installed. Next, we're going to install the rear drive shaft. So moving back here. So to get the rear drive shaft in, we're going to put the slip yoke in first. Should be able to fit on there just about anyway. Sometimes if the grease is really tight, you may have to tap it on the end with a mallet in order to get it to go in there. So once the slip yoke is in place, now we need to go to the other end of the drive shaft. And take a look here at how things are lining up. We just want to rotate the back differential and remove the tape until we see that the back differential is lining up with the two caps. Then we want to pull the slip yoke back out slightly until we have it fully seated in the rear differential yoke. Should make sure those two tabs on either side are all the way in. And then we can put our strap bolts back in place. Again, tightening these strap bolts to between 12 and 16 foot-pounds. So that's 14 in my case. Okay, so strap bolts on one side. And of course, these bolts are supposed to be brand new every single time you go to do this because of stretching. I'm not going to say old bolts won't work. They probably will. But ideally, we're replacing them. I don't know how much of life is going to be ideal. Just communicating what would be ideal. And once we get one side started all the way, we might want to rotate everything and do the other side. Definitely want to make sure that this cap can't go anywhere. If it does, you'll end up with a very weird wobbly sound that may or may not be obvious. And if you have any trouble getting everything torqued, you can go ahead and put the vehicle back in park. And once it's in park, it should let you torque everything without having to hold on to the drive shaft. Okay, so the last thing we need to do to fill up the transfer case with fluid. So I have 2 plugs here on the transfer case. See, on this transfer case, you need to use an adjustable wrench. You just want to pull the top one open. And you're going to put between 2.5 and 3 quarts of ATF4 or equivalent fluid into the transfer case. You basically just want to fill it up using a pump or something else like it until fluid begins to run out of this top hole. So take that off. That's our fill plug. And we're going to get some transmission fluid and fill it in until it begins to run out. Okay, and the way I tend to do this is by setting up a pump, something like this one, so that I have the output connected into the hole on the transfer case right here. And so I have the other end into my container of automatic transmission fluid. And I've got my cookie sheet back out again for when it starts to spill out of the transfer case. I'm going to put one end of the pump, the hose into the transmission fluid, and hang on to it while I pump fluid up to the top. It's usually about 2.5 quarts, sometimes a little bit less or a little bit more, and you just want to keep the top hose from popping itself back out. Every once in a while you might just push back on it again. And once we get all of our transmission fluid in there, put the drain plug back in place. And that's the complete removal and installation of this NP249 transfer case. Working on a 94 Jeep Grand Cherokee right now. And they go very similarly in just about any other application for this transfer case. Okay, so I'm getting the end of my first container there. Open up another one. Transfer my hose over. Okay, and once you start to see a little bit dripping out, that means you've got enough fluid in there. You can take this back out. Go ahead and grab your plug. And screw it into place. You definitely want to tighten the plug with the wrench. Okay, so if you like this video, go ahead and like it, and then subscribe to the channel so I can send you more information like this in the future.